A young black girl makes her first chess move in a towering lobby, quiet, fearless. Across from her, a billionaire woman stops cold, her breath caught her eyes glassy. No one understands why a simple move from a child could shake someone so powerful until the woman whispers, "Where did she learn that what happens next will tear open a past meant to stay buried? Where are you watching from? And is it morning or night for you right now?" Drop it below. If this touching stories moment gripped you, like and subscribe to see what comes next. The morning light hit the city in soft gold, but nothing about this part of Manhattan ever felt soft. The streets outside Lansbury Holdings were polished, sure glass towers, clean sidewalks, doormen in tailored coats. But there was a cold edge under the surface, a sharpness only those who didn't belong could feel. Noah Carter stood at the curb, one hand on the small of his daughter's back, the other holding a worn leather folder. His posture was careful, not nervous, just measured. He adjusted the collar of his shirt and glanced down at Claire. She was looking up at the building, not at him. Eyes wide, fascinated, completely unaware of the undercurrent that made Noah's stomach tighten. Claire was 8 years old, tall for her age, with a light brown complexion and a head full of soft curls pulled into a neat ponytail. Her clothes were clean and pressed her backpack a little too large for her frame, but she carried herself with that steady confidence that only children who haven't yet been broken learn to wear naturally. She didn't know what this place was, not really. To her, it was just a tall building with glass everywhere, where her dad sometimes had to drop off parts or fix a server. Today was different, though. Today, Noah had been asked to hand-deliver a diagnostics report for a malfunction in one of Lansbury's secure conference rooms. And Claire had the day off from school. It was supposed to be a simple errand in and out. "Can I come inside this time?" she asked, not whining, just curious. Noah hesitated. He'd brought her along before, but she'd always waited in the truck. Something about walking her through those marble floors didn't sit right with him. But she was getting older, and he was tired of always saying no. Just for a minute, he said, his voice low but warm. "Stay close to me, okay?" She nodded, then smiled already halfway to the door before he finished locking the truck. As they approached the front desk, Noah could feel the eyes before they even looked up. The lobby was wide and spotless white marble with gray veining cold underfoot. 2 large planters flanked the entrance like soldiers, and behind the sleek reception desk sat a young woman in a navy blazer, typing something without looking up. To her left stood a tall security guard, white with a buzz cut and an earpiece. He leaned slightly forward when he saw Noah and Claire approaching, subtle but unmistakable. "Hi." Noah began offering the folder. "I've got a delivery for the systems division." Was asked to hand it off directly. The receptionist looked up. Her eyes didn't land on Noah's face first. They paused barely a second on Claire. Something flickered across her expression so quick it would have passed unnoticed to anyone not trained to see it. But Noah had seen it 100 times, 100 places. Her smile was polite, efficient. "Name Noah Carter. I'm with MediaTek Systems. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but then I'll need to check with someone before I can let you through." The way she said, "You" carried weight. Not aggressive, just enough resistance to make clear you don't belong here unless someone says you do. Claire tugged at Noah's sleeve. "Dad," she whispered, "is that glass?" He followed her gaze to a display table in the far corner of the lobby. On it sat a crystal chess set gleaming under a spotlight. The board itself was made of alternating clear and frosted squares, and the pieces were delicate stylized rooks like pillars queens with tiny crowns. Claire moved toward it instinctively. "Claire," Noah said just loud enough. She stopped but didn't come back, her eyes still locked on the board. The receptionist was speaking again, something about policy and waiting and checking with the supervisor. Noah nodded, trying to remain calm. He knew this routine. No raised voices, no sighing, no sharp retorts. Not here. He glanced at Claire again. "Can she look at that for a minute?" he asked, quiet, almost embarrassed to have to ask. The receptionist hesitated, then shrugged. "Just don't touch." Claire didn't touch. She circled the table like it was a sacred object. Her fingers hovered close to the edge of the board, not quite making contact. Her eyes were locked on the pieces, tracking the positions, even though it was a decorative setup and not a real game. Noah watched her and felt the first tug of unease, not at her interest, but at how naturally she focused, how she tilted her head just slightly, like she was studying something deeper than the game itself. He'd seen that look before years ago on someone else's face. The security guard cleared his throat. Not a word, just a sound. A reminder. Noah stepped back to Claire and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Time to go, kiddo. But I know. But we're not staying. As he turned her toward the elevator bank, one of the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. A woman stepped out. She looked barely over 30, sharp-featured, with high cheekbones and intense eyes framed by sleek chestnut hair. Her suit was modern, deep charcoal, cut perfectly to her frame. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who wasn't just used to authority, but had been born into it. She didn't speak, didn't even stop. But as she passed, her eyes caught Claire's for the briefest moment, and something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't obvious, but it was there. Claire's gaze lingered a second too long, her mouth parting slightly, like she'd been caught off guard. The woman kept walking, her heels soft on the marble. Noah didn't notice the glance. His focus was on the receptionist, who now waved him forward with a thin smile. "You're good. You can drop it at the fourth-floor desk." As they walked toward the elevator, Claire turned to look back at the chessboard one last time. "Why do they have that there?" she asked softly. Noah pressed the elevator button. "Decoration. Makes the place look smart." Claire didn't respond, but something about her face had changed. The fascination hadn't faded. It had grown quieter, deeper. The elevator doors slid open. They stepped inside. Claire stood close eyes on the floor as the doors closed. What neither of them saw was the woman who had just exited, the same woman, now standing just beyond the lobby's edge, half-turned, watching the elevator they'd entered. Her expression unreadable. Her fingers flexed once, then stilled. And back near the reception desk, the chessboard sat untouched, its crystal pieces locked mid-game. No hands moving them, no names assigned, no sides chosen yet. But something had already started, something no one in that lobby had expected, not even Vivian Lansbury. The elevator hummed softly as it climbed. Claire stood close to the panel, her fingers laced behind her back eyes, steady on the floor numbers as they lit up one by one. Noah watched her from the side, still holding the folder, still thinking about the woman in the charcoal suit. She had looked right at Claire, not just noticed her, but seen her. It was the kind of gaze that reached deeper than politeness, the kind that held something unresolved. He didn't mention it. Claire didn't ask, but the air between them had shifted, and neither of them quite knew how. When they stepped off on the fourth floor, the hallway was quieter. The lights were softer here, and the carpet beneath their shoes absorbed the sound of each step. A receptionist at the systems division nodded and took the envelope from Noah with a "thank you," her voice flat and transactional. She didn't look at Claire. Most people didn't, but Claire didn't seem to mind. Her attention had already drifted again to another glass chess set placed by the window, this one larger, more traditional, with ivory and obsidian pieces arranged mid-game. Noah glanced over, half expecting her to rush toward it, but she didn't. She only looked, her head tilted slightly, fingers twitching, as if miming the next move in her mind. Before Noah could say anything, the door behind them opened, and the woman from the lobby stepped inside. She moved with the same quiet grace, but something in her face had changed. Still composed, but no longer distant. Her eyes immediately found Claire, then flicked to Noah, as if confirming something she'd already begun to suspect. Noah straightened, unsure whether to introduce himself or step aside. He didn't need to choose. She was looking at the chess set downstairs. The woman said, her voice low but clear. "Does she play?" Claire looked up, surprised to be spoken to directly. She glanced at Noah, then back at the woman. "A little," she said. "My dad taught me, but I mostly just see things." The woman smiled faintly, a brief expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "See things, like how the board works, where things want to go." Noah gave a quiet chuckle, his nerves easing slightly. "She's got an eye for it. I just showed her the basics." The woman turned toward the larger chess set by the window. She walked over, touched one of the black pawns, and looked back. "Would you like to try a game?" Claire didn't move right away. She looked at the board, then at her father. "Can I?" Noah hesitated. There was no reason to say no, but still, something about the offer felt loaded. He nodded once. "Just one. Be polite." Claire walked to the table and sat. Her posture shifted immediately, not stiff, not eager, just focused. She reached for the white side without asking, began to rearrange the pieces quickly, but carefully, as if she already knew the position she wanted. The woman sat across from her, eyes narrowing just slightly in observation. "What's your name?" she asked. "Claire. I'm Vivian." They shook hands. Claire's was small and warm. Vivian's was cool and deliberate. Then the game began. Noah leaned against the far wall, arms crossed. From where he stood, he could see both faces clearly, Claire's focused and relaxed, Vivian's analytical, slightly tense. With each move, Claire leaned in, eyes narrowing just a bit, her lips moving silently. Vivian responded with quick flicks of her wrist, never breaking eye contact for long. A few turns in, she paused, watching Claire reach for her knight. "You're not playing like a beginner," she said. Claire shrugged. "I don't think about the pieces. I think about space." Vivian's brows lifted. "Who taught you to do that?" "No one. I just see it." The silence that followed wasn't empty. Vivian watched her for several seconds longer, then needed something unreadable crossing her face. Then she made her move. Noah shifted uncomfortably. Something about the way Vivian was looking at Claire, calculating but soft, was waking an old discomfort in his chest. It wasn't threatening, it wasn't invasive, but it was familiar in a way that made his throat tighten. The game went on for nearly 15 minutes. Neither spoke much after that. Claire's moves were confident, intuitive, but not reckless. Vivian was faster, but less fluid, as if she were measuring herself against something she didn't quite understand. On the final play, Claire pinned Vivian's queen with a rook, a clean tactic that forced a concession in 3 more moves. Vivian stared at the board, then leaned back, smiling for real this time. "Well," she said, "that's one I won't forget." Claire smiled, but didn't gloat. "You almost had me with the bishop earlier." Vivian looked across the table, her eyes softening. "Almost." She stood, brushing invisible dust from her skirt. "Do you like playing? I mean really playing, not just with your dad, but against others. Competing." Claire shrugged. "I never have. I just play because it feels like everything slows down when I do." Vivian nodded slowly, then turned to Noah. Would she be interested in playing again somewhere quieter? Less office-like. Noah straightened. "You mean, I have a house just outside the city, not far. We have a chessboard there. Real one. Solid oak. I thought, maybe she'd like to visit, just for a game or two, if that's all right with you." The invitation landed heavier than it sounded. Vivian wasn't just inviting Claire to play. She was opening something up carefully, cautiously, but clearly. Noah didn't respond immediately. His eyes drifted to Claire, who was looking up at him with a kind of pleading curiosity. She didn't understand the full weight of the question, but she knew it mattered. "I don't know," he said slowly. "That's kind of a big ask from someone we just met." "I understand," Vivian replied, "but if you change your mind, have her come for a visit, Saturday or Sunday. I'll have someone from my office call." She offered a card, which Noah accepted reluctantly. Her fingers brushed his for just a second longer than expected. He saw something shift in her again, this time not curiosity, but hesitation. Claire's voice cut through the pause. "Do you live alone?" Vivian glanced down. "Yes, just me." "Then it'll be quiet," Claire said simply. Vivian didn't smile this time. She only nodded once, then turned to leave. Noah watched her walk down the hallway, her figure straight and sure, but something in her shoulders had tightened. He looked down at the card in his hand. Just a name. Vivian Lansbury. No title. No address. Only a number. Claire reached for his sleeve. "Is it okay?" He looked at her. She looked hopeful. Not excited. Hopeful, like she wanted a place to sit that felt like hers even for a little while. He nodded. "We'll see," he said. They walked back to the elevator in silence, but something in the air had changed. The building no longer felt cold. It felt suspended, like the moment before a question is answered. Neither of them knew that the next time they stepped into a room with Vivian Lansbury, nothing about their lives would stay the same. Elsewhere in an upper-floor office of Lansbury Holdings, Maria stood quietly behind a frosted glass door, watching Vivian read through reports without truly seeing them. The younger woman's jaw was clenched fingers tapping absently on the corner of her tablet, posture taut like a wire pulled too tight. Maria stepped in without knocking. She said yes. Maria said plainly. Vivian didn't look up. "I assumed she would. You're opening something you've kept locked for a very long time." Vivian tapped again, harder now. "I'm offering a child the chance to play chess in a quiet space. Nothing more." Maria crossed the room and set a file down gently on the desk. "You're offering her a doorway into a house that once turned its back on someone who should have belonged here. If you let her in even a little and then pull away, you won't just hurt her. You'll repeat something that was already done once cruelly." Vivian finally looked up. Her eyes were sharp, but not angry. "I haven't decided anything yet." Maria's voice softened. "Maybe, but your eyes have." Saturday arrived under a sky that couldn't quite decide between sun and rain. The clouds moved slowly thick and gray, like the world itself had chosen a slower pace for this day. Noah drove the two of them upstate in silence for most of the ride. Claire sat in the back seat instead of beside him, not because he told her to, but because she seemed to want that quiet space to herself. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a navy dress with a white collar, clean sneakers, and a light jacket just in case. Her backpack held a small travel chessboard, even though she hadn't been told to bring one. When they passed through the tall wrought iron gate that marked the edge of the Lansbury estate, Claire looked up for the first time in nearly an hour. "Is this where she lives?" she asked. "Yeah," Noah answered. "Looks like it." The driveway curved gently through lines of manicured trees. The house that emerged wasn't ostentatious, but it was undeniably grand. Long stone walls, deep-set windows, ivy that had been trimmed but not entirely removed. There was a stillness to the place, not dead, just paused. As they parked, the front door opened, and Maria stepped out to greet them. She didn't smile, but her tone was warm. "Good afternoon." "Claire, I'm glad you could make it." Claire nodded, her voice soft. "Thank you for inviting me." Maria turned to Noah. "You're welcome to wait in the study, or walk the grounds if you prefer." Noah looked toward the house. "I'll stay close." Inside the house was even quieter than expected. The floors were polished, but not sterile. Everything had a sense of deliberate design paintings that belonged to a family lineage, books placed not just for show, but because someone once read them. Vivian wasn't waiting at the door. It was Maria who guided Claire into a sitting room that felt more like a small museum than a living space. At its center stood the chess table, dark oak, beautifully carved with carved bone and onyx pieces, resting atop a leather-bound board. Claire walked to it slowly, touching nothing at first. Then she ran a single finger along the edge of the rook, as if checking to see if it would vanish at her touch. "She'll be down in a moment," Maria said quietly. "She's nervous." Claire looked over surprised. "She is." Maria smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised who gets nervous." When Vivian appeared a few minutes later, she wasn't dressed for an event. She wore a gray cashmere sweater and black slacks, hair down, face free of the usual layers of presentation. Her steps were careful. She didn't look at Noah, though she knew he was there. Her eyes were on Claire alone. "I'm glad you came," she said. Claire nodded. "Me too." Vivian gestured to the board. "Do you want to start?" Claire hesitated. "Black or white, you choose." Claire took black. She sat down, unzipped her backpack, and pulled out a small notebook, setting it beside her. Vivian sat across from her and began resetting the pieces. Their fingers moved in a rhythm that felt rehearsed, even though it wasn't. The first few moves passed in silence. Noah, watching from the corner of the room, could feel something thickening in the air between them. Not tension, not conflict, but weight. Each move carried something unsaid. Vivian broke the silence around move 10. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." Claire didn't look up. Were they good at chess? They could have been great, but they were told it didn't matter, that they had other paths to follow. Did they believe that for a while? Claire moved her knight without pause. "Did you tell them that Vivian blinked once?" "No, someone else did." Claire nodded as if filing that answer away. Noah felt his throat tighten. Maria, now standing at the far end of the hallway, didn't speak, but her arms were folded tightly across her chest, and her eyes never left the two at the table. After nearly 40 minutes, the game reached a quiet stalemate, not because either had won, but because both had stopped trying. The board was full of possibilities, but neither made the next move. Vivian leaned back, breathing in slowly. "You're different than most people I've met," she said. Claire didn't smile. "So are you." Vivian tilted her head. "Is that good or bad? I haven't decided yet." Vivian let out a soft laugh. "Fair enough." Maria stepped in. "Dinner will be ready in a little while. Would you like to stay?" Claire looked at her father. Noah met her eyes, saw the question sitting just behind them, and nodded. She turned back to Maria. "Yes, please." Vivian stood. "Then maybe after dinner. We play one more." Claire gave the smallest nod. "One more." The morning after dinner arrived with a quiet that felt too deliberate, as if the walls themselves were listening. Light poured through the tall windows of the Lansbury estate in long strips falling across the polished wood floors and the thick rug beneath the chess table. Vivian stood in the kitchen, a cup of tea resting untouched in her hand. Her gaze wasn't on the mug. It was fixed on the hallway just beyond, where she could hear Claire's faint footsteps as the girl wandered the house with careful curiosity. Vivian didn't call out. She simply listened to the light thud of soft shoes, the pause at certain doorways, the quiet breath that came before movement. It was the same way she used to move years ago when silence was a way of staying invisible in a house that had no space for who she really was. Claire appeared in the doorway, her eyes catching on Vivian's for a second, then moving to the kitchen island. "Is it okay if I sit?" she asked, her voice steady but soft. Vivian nodded. Of course. Claire climbed onto the stool, folding her hands in her lap. She didn't speak again right away. Vivian watched her carefully, unsure if she should speak first or wait. Eventually, Claire broke the silence. "This house feels big, but it doesn't feel full." Vivian's hand tightened slightly around the tea mug. "It hasn't felt full in a long time." Claire looked down at her lap, then back up. "Did you always live here?" "No," Vivian replied, setting the mug down without taking a sip. "I left when I was younger. I only came back after my father passed." Claire seemed to consider that. "Did you like your dad?" Vivian blinked. The question landed heavier than she'd expected, not because it was blunt, but because it was sincere. Children didn't ask things to corner you. They asked because they genuinely wanted to understand the world they were trying to grow into. "No," Vivian said after a long pause. "Not really." Claire nodded once, then slid a finger along the edge of the counter. "My mom left before I was born. Dad doesn't talk about it much." Vivian felt something in her chest tighten. Not panic, not shame, but something older buried that had started to shift ever since the first time she saw Claire in that lobby. She turned away slightly, needing to ground herself. "Would you like to play another game before breakfast?" she asked, almost as a distraction. Claire's eyes brightened. "Yes." They moved to the chess room again, but this time Vivian let Claire set the board. The girl's fingers moved with ease, not because she'd been taught formally, but because the shapes made sense to her. She wasn't trying to memorize positions, she was recognizing patterns, responding with instinct. Vivian watched her, saying nothing, not even correcting her when she made an unconventional move with her pawn that forced an unexpected defense. The game unfolded slowly with long pauses between plays, not because of hesitation, but because both players were thinking beyond the board. Upstairs, Maria stood at the top of the staircase, her hand resting on the banister. She could see them from above through the open archway that overlooked the main sitting room. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt. She only watched. And as she watched, something pulled her back, soft at first, then unmistakable. It wasn't the way Claire moved her rook or how she tilted her head when considering a sacrifice. It was her expression, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the flicker of focus, the stillness of her body when the world around her fell away. Maria had seen that before. Not in Vivian, though it was close. In someone else. She stepped back from the rail and returned to her room. From a drawer beneath a row of neatly folded scarves, she pulled a small photograph, the edges curled from time but still intact. In the photo, Vivian was barely 19, seated on a piano bench, her back-straight eyes glowing with something that looked dangerously close to joy. Beside her was a man with warm eyes and long fingers that hovered above the keys. Daniel Cross. He wasn't posing. He was mid-laugh, his mouth open, his hand resting gently on Vivian's knee as if she were the music he was playing. Maria sat down on the edge of her bed and stared at the photo for a long time. She remembered the day it was taken. Daniel had surprised Vivian with a chess set carved from reclaimed wood. The board burned at the edges, each piece slightly uneven. Vivian had laughed at its imperfection, but played for hours. That same day, they had sat by the piano, and Daniel had played Debussy as Vivian made her first attempt at a full symphony match, narrating each move like it was part of a composition. Maria had stood in the doorway, then too unnoticed, watching something she knew wouldn't last. Not because it wasn't real, but because the world outside that room wasn't built to hold it. Later that week, Harold Lansbury had walked in during one of Daniel's visits. He didn't yell, he didn't raise a hand, but his words cut deeper than either of them expected. "You think this house, this family will hold a name like his, end it, or walk away from everything." Vivian had sat frozen on the couch, her hands clenched in her lap. Daniel had stood straight and composed and simply said, "I won't be your mistake." Then he left. And he never came back. Maria didn't know everything that followed. Vivian never spoke of it again. The chessboard disappeared. The piano was closed. Vivian went abroad to study finance, and the house grew quieter with each passing year. But Maria remembered the look on her face as she watched Daniel walk out, not broken, not angry, just still. A stillness that settled deep and never left. Now downstairs, Claire made a final move that forced a draw. Vivian stared at the board for a long time before speaking. "You don't play to win," she said. Claire shrugged. "I play to feel calm." Vivian nodded. "That's how it used to feel for me too." Claire looked up. "Why did you stop?" Vivian met her eyes. "Because someone told me I couldn't be who I was and still belong here." Claire didn't blink. "That doesn't sound fair." Vivian's voice was steady but soft. It wasn't. In the doorway, Maria appeared, her step's slow expression unreadable. She looked at the board, then at Claire, then back to Vivian. "She reminds me of someone," Maria said quietly. Vivian nodded. "I know." Maria's voice dropped. "He never really left, did he?" Vivian didn't answer, but her hands resting on her lap had begun to tremble. Just slightly. Claire didn't notice. She was already resetting the board. "Do you want to play again?" she asked, looking up with a small, hopeful grin. Vivian took a breath. "One more." And as the pieces slid back into place, Maria stepped away, back into the hall, heart heavy with a truth she hadn't spoken in decades. Daniel Cross had been erased from the house, but not from the people in it. And now, through the hands and eyes of a child, the game he once believed in was starting again. The house was still almost unnaturally so, the way a place gets when emotions too large to say aloud start pressing against the walls. Claire had gone home with Noah that evening, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her small hand waving one last time from the back seat as they pulled down the long driveway. Vivian had watched from the porch, arms crossed, not against the chill, but against the ache that had taken up residence inside her chest. It wasn't sudden. It had been creeping in for days now, ever since that first game. That first glance, that first question, Claire asked, not with suspicion, but with something gentler and far more dangerous recognition. Vivian sat at the edge of her bed, the white bedsheet smoothed beneath her palms, a small plastic zip bag resting in her lap. Inside, a single hair, brown curly at the end, pulled gently from a brush Claire had used the morning before. Vivian hadn't even realized what she was doing until the moment the strand was in her hand, her fingers already reaching for the sterile bag she kept in the bottom drawer, once used to collect samples for investor background checks, for security clearances, never for anything personal, never for this. She stared at it now the same way she might study a chessboard after a move too bold to reverse. Her breath moved slowly. Her thoughts didn't. She had already mailed the sample, already signed the form, using a name that wouldn't be traced to her directly. The results would come by the end of the week. All she had to do was wait, and that waiting opened a space in her that she had kept shut for over 8 years. On Thursday morning, the envelope arrived. Not thick, not dramatic, just white business stock with a return address from a private lab in Connecticut. Maria brought it in with the rest of the morning correspondence and placed it silently on Vivian's desk, her hand hovering for a second longer than usual before she walked out. She didn't ask. Vivian didn't offer. But Maria knew. She always knew. Vivian waited until the house was empty, Maria out running errands the cleaning staff finished and gone before she opened it. The paper inside was unremarkable. Black type on white paper. One line bolded probability of maternity greater than 99.99%. Vivian didn't gasp. She didn't drop the paper or clutch her chest. She didn't weep or whisper Claire's name. She simply stood there, the page trembling slightly between her fingers, not from shock, but from the sheer pressure of everything it confirmed. The room felt smaller. The air felt thick. She moved to the armchair near the window, sat slowly, laid the paper on her lap, and stared not at the words, but through them. Her heartbeat wasn't fast. It was heavy. Each thump a memory. Each breath a reminder of what she had chosen to forget. Daniel's voice came back first, not loud, not pleading, just steady calm the way he always spoke when she was spiraling. "You're afraid of who you are when you're with me." But I'm not. She had hated him for that, not because it was unkind, but because it was true. He saw her the way Claire did now, not as Vivian Lansbury, the girl trained to inherit a boardroom, but as someone who used to sneak into basements just to practice moves in peace, someone who found herself at a piano bench beside a man who didn't belong to her world, but fit into her soul like a missing piece. And she had let that go, because her father made her believe she had to. Because she didn't fight hard enough to say otherwise, because she had been young and brilliant, but still afraid. Now that fear had a name. Claire. Vivian didn't move for a long time. The day stretched without sound. She didn't touch her phone. She didn't answer her emails. She didn't respond to the reminder about the next quarterly meeting. The only thing she did was read the paper again and again, until the numbers blurred and the words lost their shape, and all that remained was the fact she could no longer pretend. The child wasn't a mystery. The connection wasn't imagined. Claire wasn't just reminiscent of Daniel. She was their daughter, and Vivian had spent nearly a decade pretending her existence would never happen. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees when Maria returned. She stepped into the study, quietly glancing once at the untouched tea, the unread reports, the silence that hung too neatly in the air. "Did it come?" she asked gently. Vivian didn't look up. "Yes." And Vivian tapped the paper with the side of her finger. "It's her. It's always been her." Maria crossed the room, sat in the chair opposite, and folded her hands in her lap. "You knew before the test." Vivian let out a breath, one that sounded too much like surrender. "I needed it written, something that couldn't lie." Maria didn't rush her. She waited. Vivian finally looked up. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be her mother. I don't know what I'm supposed to say, or how to say it. And I've already done so much damage by not being there at all." Maria's face softened, but her tone didn't. "Then don't start by trying to be a mother. Start by being honest." Vivian shook her head slowly. "What if she hates me?" "She's a child," Maria said. "She doesn't need you to be perfect. She just needs you to stop pretending you're not part of her." Vivian looked back down at the paper. "I don't think I can undo what I did to Daniel." Maria's eyes held. "You can't, but you can stop erasing him. And her." Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't hollow. It was full of grief, of clarity, of something real finally making its way to the surface. Vivian folded the paper once carefully, then slid it into the drawer beside her. She didn't lock it. She just closed it softly and leaned back in her chair. "What now?" she asked. Maria stood. "Now. Now. You show up. And maybe for once you don't try to win the game. You just sit across the board and let her see you." She paused, then added with a quiet certainty, "It's time to play the real match." Vivian didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her silence wasn't avoidance this time. It was agreement. It was the space between one move and the next, the part of the game where what you do matters more than what you say. That night, when the house was dark and the air had cooled, Vivian sat alone in the chess room, the same leather-bound board open before her. The white queen stood in the center, unmoved. She reached forward, held it between her fingers, and for the first time in years didn't think about winning. She thought about presence, about return, about what it means to be remembered, not by reputation, but by truth. The following Saturday, Claire arrived at the Lansbury estate with the same hopeful energy she had carried the first time, maybe more. She wore a bright yellow sweater and jeans that Noah had ironed that morning. Her backpack was slung casually over one shoulder, containing her chess notebook, 2 sharpened pencils, and a folded paper where she had sketched a new opening strategy she wanted to show Vivian. As the car pulled to a stop, she didn't wait for Noah to open the door. She stepped out quickly, turned toward the front of the house, and called out without hesitation, "Miss Vivian, I'm here." Her voice echoed lightly across the stone facade, filled with warmth, eager in a way only children could be when they believe a place is beginning to feel like theirs. The door opened after a few seconds. Vivian stood just inside the frame, dressed in soft gray slacks and a navy blouse, her hair neatly pulled back. She looked composed, but something behind her eyes had dimmed since their last meeting. Claire didn't notice it right away. She smiled and waved, already halfway to the door, her voice light and sincere. "I brought something new. I wanted to try it with the bishop instead of the queen. I think it's faster." Vivian stepped aside slowly, holding the door open with one hand. "You can come in," she said, her tone flat polite. Not cold, but not warm either. Claire hesitated for a fraction of a second, then walked in with the same excitement, though it began to soften as she passed the threshold. Inside the house felt quieter than before. Not peaceful, just silent, in a way that didn't welcome. Claire followed Vivian toward the sitting room, expecting the board to be set up, or at least half played like they often left it. But the table was empty. No pieces, no notebook, no small cup of orange tea waiting on the side. Vivian motioned toward the couch. "You can sit if you'd like. I have a few things to finish upstairs." Her voice stayed distant, almost formal. Claire sat down slowly. "Are we not playing today?" she asked gently. Vivian's back was already turned. Maybe later. Claire didn't ask anything else right away. She sat still for several minutes, her fingers resting on her knees, eyes moving around the room that had once felt like a secret world just for her. It now felt too neat, too arranged, like a museum exhibit that couldn't be touched. She reached into her bag, pulled out the folded paper with her sketched strategy, and placed it on the coffee table, smoothing it out carefully. She waited another few minutes, then stood and wandered to the chessboard herself. The pieces were still in the drawer below. She opened it quietly, took out the white knight, and held it in her hand, turning it slowly between her fingers. Upstairs, Vivian stood at the railing, watching from above, hidden behind the carved woodwork of the second-floor landing. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and her jaw was tense. She didn't know what she was doing watching the child she had helped bring into the world, and yet had spent years pretending didn't exist. She wanted to speak. She wanted to walk downstairs, kneel beside Claire, and tell her everything, the truth, the fear, the shame. But the words wouldn't come. They jammed somewhere between her ribs and throat, a barricade built from years of silence and a father's legacy of control. She turned away before Claire could see her. Claire eventually returned to the couch. She looked toward the hallway, then toward the empty staircase, then back at her paper. Her fingers began to fold it again, slower this time. She didn't understand why the air felt different. Vivian hadn't said anything cruel, but she also hadn't said anything kind. Not a single question, not a smile, not even, "How are you today, Claire?" She sat back against the couch and stared up at the ceiling. Her legs hung slightly off the edge, not touching the ground. She didn't cry. She didn't frown. She just went still. When Maria walked in holding a tray of tea and cookies, she stopped at the sight of Claire's posture. Something in the child's stillness struck her instantly. She placed the tray down, knelt slowly in front of Claire, and spoke softly. "She's scared." Claire looked at her. Of me, Maria shook her head. Of herself. Of being someone she doesn't know how to be yet. Claire's eyes stayed locked on Maria's. "Did I do something wrong? No," Maria said firmly. "You did everything right." Claire didn't speak again. She looked down at her lap, then at the knight still in her hand. Maria rose, took the tray, and walked toward the back of the house without another word. When she reached Vivian's study, she paused at the door. Vivian sat at her desk, eyes fixed on the closed laptop in front of her hands, folded tightly. Maria didn't wait for permission. She walked in, placed a small square envelope on the desk, and unfolded a yellowed sheet of paper beside it. Vivian looked down, recognizing the worn edges, the handwritten musical notations, the soft graphite smudges in the corners. It was Daniel's composition, a short piano piece he had written for Vivian the year they met, simple, aching, full of minor keys and hesitant pauses. It had lived in the drawer of Maria's desk for years, untouched but never forgotten. Vivian's eyes didn't lift. Maria stood across from her, voice steady. "You're hurting her the same way you were hurt, not with cruelty, with silence." Vivian's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask her to come here. She came because you opened the door," Maria said. "She's not asking for a mother. She's asking for someone who won't pretend she doesn't exist." Vivian closed her eyes. "I don't know how to do this." "Yes," Maria replied, "you do. You just don't believe you deserve to." She stepped back, her voice quieter now. "But that little girl downstairs, she deserves something more than what you're giving her today." Maria left the music on the desk and walked out. Downstairs, Claire was still on the couch, her head resting now against the side cushion, her arms wrapped around her knees. The light from the window cast long shadows across the floor. The room was quiet. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was retreating, slowly, quietly, the way children do when they realize something has changed and no one is willing to say why. Vivian stayed in her study for nearly an hour. She didn't play the music. She didn't move. She just sat with it, letting the weight of her own choices settle like dust on the page. She thought about Daniel, about the way he used to trace the lines of her fingers like sheet music, about how he once said, "You can't disappear from your own life, Viv. That's not how time works." And then she thought about Claire, small, warm, bright, and silent now, because silence was the only thing being given in return. She stood, slowly took the sheet music in hand, and walked down the hallway. But when she reached the sitting room, it was empty. Claire's folded paper still sat on the table, her knight placed gently on top. Vivian walked over, picked up the sketch, and read the notes written in Claire's slanted handwriting. "White bishop goes here, black pawn waits 2 turns. Don't forget the left side. That's where she'll try to trick you." Her voice echoed softly in her mind. That child had studied this, had looked forward to it, and she had shut her out. Vivian sank into the nearest chair, holding the folded paper to her chest. She didn't cry, but her throat burned, not from grief, from the weight of the first wound she had delivered not by force but by fear. Upstairs, Maria watched from the landing. She didn't speak. She didn't interfere. She only nodded once slowly as if confirming something she had already known. Vivian had failed to say the word mother, but her silence had spoken loud enough to bruise. The next morning came with the kind of silence that lingered too long. Claire hadn't said much on the ride home the evening before. She had leaned her head against the window and kept her eyes on the blur of trees and traffic lights, her backpack clutched in her lap. Noah had asked gently if she was okay, and she had nodded without speaking. He didn't push. He recognized that quiet, not the sulking kind, not boredom either, but the sort that grows when something shifts inside and a child doesn't yet have words for it. When they arrived home, Claire walked straight to her room, brushed her teeth without being told, and crawled into bed without asking for a story. The next day, she was up early, already dressed, sitting at the table with her travel chessboard open pieces arranged in a defense pattern she had practiced the week before. Her notebook was beside her, and she was writing something when Noah walked in, rubbing the back of his neck and watching her quietly before speaking. "Tournaments today," he said. Claire nodded. "I know." They had signed her up a month earlier, back when chess had still felt like play. It was a city-level youth match, open bracket, not ranked but still serious. Parents would be there, coaches, kids who took lessons every week. Claire had never played in front of a crowd before. She had never needed to. Her world of chess had been private, quiet, safe. Just her dad, and lately Vivian. But now she was going to sit at a table with strangers, and there would be no familiar faces across the board. Noah packed her things and helped her into her coat. He didn't say much, only, "Just focus on the game, not the room. You're ready." Claire nodded again. "What if I lose?" she asked. Noah smiled faintly, brushing a loose curl from her cheek. "Then you lose, and then you play again next time. That's all." Vivian met them at the venue. It was a clean, bright space inside a downtown community center. High ceilings, tall windows, rows of folding chairs, and narrow tables with square boards set every few feet. The air smelled faintly of floor polish and coffee. Children, mostly between ages 7 and 12, filed in with their parents, some in matching school blazers or chess club jackets. Claire stood out instantly, not because she was poorly dressed, but because she wasn't from any team. Her skin was darker than most, her curls different, her notebook hand-drawn rather than printed. Some of the other parents looked at her, then at Noah, then at Vivian, their expressions unreadable, but unmistakably curious. One woman in a white blazer with gold buttons leaned toward another and whispered something while glancing at them. Claire noticed. She didn't say anything. When it was time to be seated, she walked to her assigned board quietly, head high, fingers tight around the strap of her bag. Her opponent was a boy in a navy tie, hair parted stiffly, with a coach standing behind him, who glanced at Claire, then immediately turned away. She placed her pieces without fumbling, but something in her shoulders had begun to curl inward. Vivian and Noah stood at the back of the room, separated by a few feet. Noah kept his hands in his pockets, shifting his weight now and then. Vivian stood still, eyes locked on Claire, jaw tense. She had planned to stay back, to not interfere, but when she saw the way Claire sat small, still not looking up, something in her chest clenched hard. The match started. Claire opened with a queen's pawn, clean and confident. The boy countered well. It was not that Claire didn't know what to do. Her hands moved with clarity. Her eyes stayed on the board. But the room was full of voices, whispers, the sound of a phone camera clicking from somewhere behind. A girl at another table scoffed and muttered, "She's probably a charity case." Claire heard it. She didn't flinch, but her hand paused just a beat too long before moving the bishop. Her opponent saw it, smelled it. Pressure is not just psychological, it's social, and even a child can learn how it's used. 20 moves in, Claire made a mistake. Not a huge one, but enough to lose tempo. She tried to recover, but her breathing had changed. Noah noticed first. Her hands weren't moving as smoothly. She wasn't calculating the same way. She was reacting. The match dragged on longer than it needed to. Eventually, her knight was pinned. Then her king trapped. She didn't resign. She played to the end quietly until checkmate was declared. Then she sat still, her hands on her knees, eyes on the empty square where her queen had once been. The boy stood, shook her hand perfunctorily, and walked off. Claire didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't look for her father or Vivian. She just sat there, breathing slowly, her shoulders rounded, her lips pressed together in a flat line. She reached out, took the lone pawn left on her side, and held it in her palm. Vivian began to move forward, then stopped. Something in her had frozen. She remembered another room another time. A younger Daniel standing in a music hall lobby after a scholarship board meeting, his jaw tight, his voice calm, saying, "They smiled through all of it, then asked me to wait outside. I wasn't angry, Viv, just tired." Vivian stepped back, but Noah stepped forward. He crouched beside Claire, spoke quietly. "You played strong. You held your ground. That's what matters." Claire didn't answer. Her fingers curled tighter around the pawn. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I didn't belong here. They knew." Noah reached for her hand, gently prying the pawn from her fingers. "They don't decide that. You do." Behind them, Vivian watched in silence, and for the first time she understood the damage of distance. Not just absence, but presence without protection. Silence where there should have been a hand, a voice, a word. She had watched her daughter walk into a room where she did not yet have armor, and she had stood still. That realization did not crush her. It sobered her. That night, Claire didn't ask to stay over. She barely spoke during the ride home. She leaned her head against Noah's side on the couch and stayed there until she fell asleep. Vivian sat alone in her study long after the house around her too quiet to ignore. On the desk, Claire's sketch from the week before still sat, corners curled slightly. Next to it, a small onyx queen forgotten in Claire's rush to leave. Vivian picked it up and held it in her palm. It was heavier than it looked. The rain that evening was steady, not violent, but it carried a chill that seemed to slip past coats and skin straight into the bones. Inside Noah's apartment, the light was dim, warm, and quiet. Claire sat at the dining table, her sketchpad open, pencil resting lightly between her fingers. She wasn't drawing. She hadn't really drawn anything in the last hour. Instead, she stared at the page like it might eventually explain something she didn't have words for. The silence between her and Noah wasn't uncomfortable, but it was weighted like both of them knew something was on its way. Then came the knock. It was soft, deliberate, and didn't repeat. Noah rose and went to the door. He peered through the peephole, paused, then opened it. Vivian stood there soaked. No umbrella. Her hair was flat from the rain strands clinging to her cheek. Her blouse stuck to her frame. Her eyes were wide but clear, like someone who had decided they couldn't carry a lie one step further. She said nothing at first, then simply quietly, "Is she here?" Noah didn't answer immediately. He stepped back slightly, glanced toward Claire. Claire was already standing, her sketchpad closed, her eyes calm, but rigid, her entire body locked in a silent brace. Vivian saw her and inhaled sharply, not dramatically, not theatrical, just a sudden intake of breath that came from somewhere deep and long denied. She didn't move forward. She didn't try to enter. Claire didn't move closer either. "I need to talk to you," Vivian said, voice low. "Please." Claire's jaw was clenched. "You had time to talk before. You had years." Noah didn't speak. He stood like a wall between them, not blocking, but unmoving. Finally, Claire nodded once. "Say what you came to say, but don't expect me to make it easy." Vivian's hands trembled slightly, but she didn't try to hide it. She looked at Claire as though finally recognizing something sacred and fragile she hadn't dared name before. "When I was 20, Vivian began, I fell in love with your father, Daniel Cross. He was kind, brilliant, and strong in ways that challenged me. But my father, the man you would have called grandfather, he hated that love, not because of who Daniel was, but because of what he looked like. My father said our family's legacy couldn't afford a scandal, especially not one with brown skin attached. He called Daniel a distraction, and when he saw I wouldn't walk away, he stepped in." Claire crossed her arms tightly. Her breathing had quickened. Vivian pressed forward. "He forced Daniel out of my life. I didn't even get to say goodbye. Weeks later, I realized I was pregnant. I was scared, but not of the baby, of what my father would do if he knew. I tried to hide it, but when I was 4 months in, he found out. And from that moment on, I was no longer in control of my own life. He sent me abroad, Geneva, under the guise of a scholarship, but it was exile." Claire let out a small, bitter laugh. "So he shipped you off like a problem, and you just let him—" "I didn't know how to fight him," Vivian said, voice tight. "I was alone. Everything I had, my home, my future, was tied to him. I was scared, Claire. And when it came time to give birth, they didn't bring me to a hospital. They brought me to a private clinic. I was heavily sedated. I begged to see you. I screamed for you. And they took you before I even opened my eyes again. I never got to hold you, never saw your face. Noah stepped forward now, his voice sharper than Claire had ever heard it. You let them take her. You signed away your daughter because you were scared of what people in suits would think. I didn't sign anything, Vivian snapped. My father did. He had full control, guardianship, power of attorney. He planned everything while I was unconscious. When I woke up, you were gone. I was told it was done. Irreversible. They told me you'd be cared for. That it was better this way. Claire's voice cracked. You could have looked for me. You could have fought. Vivian's hands curled into fists. I wanted to. But by the time I got back, my father had just died, and I was named CEO under conditions. The board said any misstep, any media attention on a child born from that situation would threaten everything. I was under surveillance. I wasn't trusted to sneeze without a PR briefing, and I believed them. I believed that protecting the company meant staying quiet. Claire's eyes were glossy now, but there was no softness in them. So you chose your image, again and again. You could have found me when I was 5 or 10. You could have walked into a courthouse or a school, but you sat behind glass and forgot me. I didn't forget you. Vivian's voice broke fully now. I remembered you every single day, but I told myself you were better off, that maybe someone else was being the mother I couldn't be. That lie kept me breathing. Noah cut in his tone low but cold. She didn't need someone else. She needed you. While she was learning to tie her shoes and hold a pencil, she needed her mother. You don't get to stand in the rain now and call it brave. You were supposed to fight then. Vivian nodded, swallowing hard. I know, and I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I need you to know, Claire, I never stopped loving you. And when I saw you in that lobby playing that game, holding that piece exactly the way I used to, I knew. I knew it was you before the DNA. And I broke inside because I realized I had missed all of it. Claire's voice, though shaking, was sharp. So what now? You think telling me all this makes it okay, that I'll just let you be in my life like nothing happened? No, Vivian said. I don't expect that. I'm not here to be forgiven. I'm here because I can't live one more day hiding behind silence. I don't want to be your ghost anymore. I want to be real to you, even if it hurts, even if you hate me. Claire turned away, wiping her face quickly with the back of her hand. Noah stepped beside her, protective. Vivian didn't move. Finally, Claire turned back. Her face was wet from tears or rain, no one could tell. I don't know what you are to me, not yet, but I know where I came from now, and I'll hold that. Vivian nodded. That's enough, more than I hoped. Then she stepped backward into the rain, not running, not hiding, just walking away, slowly visible. The door didn't close right away. Claire stood in the frame, breathing heavily, then looked up at Noah. She was supposed to be the brave one, she whispered, and now I have to carry this. Noah placed a hand on her shoulder. You've been carrying it your whole life. Now at least you know what it is. That night, Claire opened her sketchpad again, but this time the image she drew had 2 figures, one standing, one kneeling, both in the rain. And this time the rain didn't fall between them, it fell around them. It had been less than 48 hours since Vivian stood in the rain outside Noah's apartment, confessing decades of silence. But the air in the boardroom of Lansbury Holdings that morning felt heavier than any storm. The walls were tall and glassy, the kind meant to suggest transparency, though what happened inside them was anything but. 13 people sat around the oval table, executives, legal advisors, a few long-standing shareholders, and at the head, Vivian herself. She wore no makeup again, her expression bare, her eyes sharp. There was no press release for this meeting, no talking points, no PR strategist in the corner, just the truth she had spent half her life avoiding. She had called this emergency meeting under her right as chief executive officer, something the board rarely questioned, but they weren't used to this version of her. Vivian sat not at the head of the table, but on its side, shoulder to shoulder with the people who had once dictated the most personal chapters of her life. Her voice didn't rise when she began, but it didn't waver either. I need this board to hear something today that will not be pleasant. It won't be comfortable, and it won't benefit your quarterly reports, but it is overdue. Some brows furrowed, some arms crossed. Only Maria, standing quietly behind her, nodded just once, barely. Vivian continued. 8 years ago, I gave birth to a daughter, not in this city, not under my own roof. I was in Switzerland, sent away under false pretenses by my father Harold Lansbury to cover what he believed was a scandal. He made that decision because the father of my child was a black man, and he considered that unacceptable for our lineage. He had full control over my legal guardianship at the time due to my age and the sudden death of my mother. When I was heavily sedated for delivery, he made sure my child was removed from me before I opened my eyes. I never saw her." A hush fell over the table. No one scribbled notes. No one interrupted. "Her name is Claire. She's alive, she's well, and she has grown up without me, without knowing who I was or where she came from. I didn't find her. She found me. Or perhaps fate did. And what's worse than my father's actions is my silence. I let you all convince me that our image, our perceived unity, our so-called legacy, was more important than my daughter. I let the fear of this room keep me small. But I'm done being small." A middle-aged board member with silver hair, Gregory, leaned forward. "Vivian, we understand that personal revelations can be overwhelming, but you need to understand this board." This board knew Vivian cut in. At least some of you did. You knew something had happened when I returned from Switzerland thinner, quieter, detached. You saw it and pretended it was stress. And then you kept using my silence to maintain the status quo. Another voice, Elaine Kim from Legal Affairs, cleared her throat. "If there's a legal matter here, we need to assess potential liability. If there were any missteps in custodial handling. I'm not here to sue anyone. Not yet. I'm here to say her name out loud. Claire Cross. She is my daughter. And I am done pretending she doesn't exist to preserve the comfort of this table." The room tightened as if all 13 people had collectively inhaled and didn't know how to exhale. Vivian stood now, not dramatically, just because she couldn't sit any longer. She went to a chess tournament this week, and I watched her lose. Not just the match, but her confidence, her place, her sense of belonging. Because the world saw her and assumed she didn't belong. And I realized I gave her that burden. I let her inherit my fear. Elaine leaned forward. "Vivian, if you make this public, you'll be inviting a narrative we can't control. The press will make assumptions about the company you're past the board. You're asking us to open the gates to scrutiny." Vivian nodded. "Yes, I am. Because I'd rather face scrutiny for telling the truth than gain applause for keeping a lie." Gregory's tone hardened. "Then we have to discuss consequences. Public perception affects everything, our partnerships, our investors." Maria, silent until now, stepped forward. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Your investors already know the company's human. What they haven't seen is whether it has a conscience." Vivian looked around the room, locking eyes with each member one by one. "I am acknowledging Claire publicly. I am inviting her into my life, into my home, and I want you to understand that decision is not reversible. If that means stepping down, I'll do it, but I won't pretend anymore." A long silence. The board shifted, whispered among themselves. A few stared down at their tablets. Gregory tapped his pen, paused, then finally spoke. "If you step forward with this," he said, "you carry the weight, not us. The responsibility is yours." Vivian nodded. "It always has been." She stepped back, her chest rising and falling steadily. No one applauded, no one agreed, but no one objected. Later, as she stepped out of the building, Maria walked beside her. "You didn't have to offer to resign," Maria said. "Yes, I did," Vivian replied, "because if they said yes and I wasn't willing, then none of this meant anything." Maria gave a half smile. "Claire doesn't need a CEO. She needs a mother." "I'm trying," Vivian said. "You just did." And as they stepped onto the sidewalk, Vivian felt for the first time in years the air didn't taste like someone else's permission. It felt like her own. The table was too formal. Vivian had set it that way out of habit, polished silverware, crisp napkins, wine glasses placed, though none of them would drink. The dining room of her townhouse in Brooklyn Heights was quiet, lit by soft amber sconces that left more space for silence than conversation. She had cooked or tried to. Roast chicken, 2 sides, and a store-bought pie she had cut to make it look homemade. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about proving something to herself that she could try, that she would try. Not as a CEO, not as a woman who knew her way around boardrooms and quarterly numbers, but as a woman trying to be a mother to a girl who had grown up without one. Claire sat across from her, back straight, eyes watchful. She wore a hoodie, hair tied back. Her plate was full, untouched. Beside her, Noah watched silently, his body still, but alert, like he was ready to intervene if the air shifted wrong. No one had said much since arriving, the kind of quiet where every fork placement sounded too loud. Vivian cleared her throat, once sipped water, then put the glass back down too fast. "It's okay if you don't like chicken," she said, voice thinner than she intended. I had no idea what you eat. I should have asked. Claire looked up. You don't have to cook. I wanted to. You didn't have to want to. That landed heavier than Claire probably meant it to, and even she seemed to register it because she shifted and added more softly. I'm not trying to be mean. Vivian nodded. You're not. You're just honest. That's fair. Noah broke the silence gently. We're here. That counts for something. Vivian gave him a quick grateful glance, but Claire stayed focused. I don't know what to call you. I don't know if I ever will. Vivian didn't flinch. You don't have to call me anything. Just be here. That's enough. They sat in that awkward middle space where people who share blood but not history try to find neutral ground. Vivian had memorized every article on reconnecting with estranged children, every guide on first dinners, but none of them had prepared her for the look Claire gave when her fork finally touched the plate. Not suspicion, but caution, like someone expecting the food to carry, meaning it could never live up to. Did you used to cook with him? Claire asked suddenly. Vivian blinked. Daniel! Claire nodded. No. He did most of the cooking. I watched. He used to hum while he chopped. He made this awful green soup that I pretended to like. Claire smiled for the first time all evening. Vivian's eyes softened. The air in the room loosened just a bit. He wanted you to be curious about everything. Music, food, math, chess. He thought if he kept giving you wonder, you'd grow up believing the world wanted you in it. Claire looked at her. Why didn't you? The question wasn't an attack, but it cut. Vivian sat back, breathing once before she spoke. Because I didn't know how to fight my father. I didn't even know I was allowed to. He told me being with Daniel would ruin me. Then when I got pregnant, he told me leaving the country was the only way to protect what was left of my future. I was alone, scared, and trained to obey. I thought I would see you after I recovered, but I woke up and you were gone. Claire's jaw tightened. You could have come for me. I should have. I knew where you were. I read reports. I told myself knowing you were healthy was enough. But I was wrong. That was cowardice, not care. Noah looked at Vivian, measured her. Why are you doing this now? You had years. Vivian glanced down, her fingers tensed around her napkin. Because I didn't deserve forgiveness, but I finally realized that didn't mean I shouldn't tell the truth. And because she deserves to know it, whether she accepts me or not. Claire sat in silence, then asked, why invite us here? Vivian answered, because we can't undo time, but we can share a meal. No press, no expectations, just forks and words. If we fail here together. Noah glanced at Claire before speaking. You know how I got her. Your father's legal team arranged a closed placement. They picked a quiet agency that didn't ask many questions. I wasn't told who the mother was, just that the father had been close to me. Vivian's voice cracked. That it was me. Noah nodded. I only learned the full story when I saw her sitting across from you at that first game. Claire looked at them both. So all this time, none of us knew we were already circling each other. Vivian's eyes shimmered, and still somehow you found your way back to me. Claire looked at her plate again. This chicken's actually not bad. Vivian laughed a small, surprised laugh. High praise! It wasn't resolution. It wasn't a miracle. But it was human. A table with 3 chairs filled, each person eating at their own pace, but staying. Not out of obligation, out of choice. Claire didn't call her mom. Vivian didn't ask her to. Noah didn't try to bridge what couldn't be forced. But when dessert came out and Claire reached for a second slice, she looked at Vivian for a split second longer than necessary. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't need to. The fork said enough. And for one night, that was everything. The morning light streamed in through the tall windows of Vivian's brownstone, spilling across the chessboard still sitting on the dining room table from the night before. The scent of pancakes lingered in the air, and there was a softness in the space that hadn't been there before. Vivian sat at the kitchen counter watching Claire rinse her plate at the sink, while Noah sipped his coffee across from her. There had been no declarations, no sudden transformations, but something had settled, something honest. Claire hadn't said much after last night's dinner, but before she went to bed she turned at the top of the stairs and in a voice, low but clear, called out, "Good night, Mom." Vivian had stood still for a long time after that hand resting lightly on the back of a chair, tears forming, but not falling. It wasn't everything, but it was something real. Now the next challenge waited. The state chess championship was being held in a modest but respected hall uptown, with old polished floors and rows of folding chairs that squeaked every time someone adjusted in their seat. Claire had qualified again, this time not as a charity case or under anyone's shadow, but on her own merit, invited back, because the judges remembered her composure, her precision, and though few would say it aloud, her story. Vivian, wearing no boardroom armor, just a dark sweater and simple slacks, stood by the side entrance. Noah stood to her right, his hand tucked into his coat pocket, but his body leaned slightly forward, like his whole frame was invested in the girl across the room. Claire was already seated, her fingers lightly touching each pawn, placing them just so. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't looking around. She was focused, and something in her posture had changed. She wasn't trying to make herself small anymore. She took up space. The girl across from her was older, sharper in demeanor, one of the favorites. Claire looked at her with calm interest, not as a rival, but as a participant in the same game. When the judge gave the signal, the room quieted to near silence, and the clocks were set. Each move was deliberate. Claire took her time, not rushing, but not doubting either. She adjusted her bishop to a more aggressive line, and her opponent hesitated before countering. Noah's hand gripped his coat tighter. Vivian's breath caught with each pause in the match, but her eyes stayed on Claire, not the board. About 20 minutes in, the first gasp came not from Claire, but the small group of spectators who had followed her progress. She had sacrificed a knight in a risky exchange, but 5 moves later, it was clear what she'd seen. Her queen pinned the king into a slow trap, a closing circle of pressure. The other girl looked stunned. Claire didn't gloat. She waited. When it was over, Claire didn't raise her fists. She didn't stand up or look around for validation. She sat still, then nodded once to her opponent, who nodded back, respectfully, quietly. Then Claire turned toward the edge of the room. She saw Noah first. He gave her a subtle thumbs up, his smile barely restrained. Then she turned further, and her eyes found Vivian. Vivian didn't clap. She didn't cry. But her hand went to her chest, and she mouthed the word softly, proud. Claire walked over to them, not rushed, not self-conscious, just ready. Vivian leaned down a bit, unsure how to greet her, but Claire made the decision for them. She wrapped her arms around her mother's waist, and for the first time in their lives, they hugged without any hesitation. "I did it," Claire whispered. Vivian pulled back just enough to look her in the eye. "You always could. You just needed us to see it." Noah rested a hand on Claire's shoulder. "Let's go home, champ." But Claire shook her head. "Not yet. There's one more thing." They watched as she walked over to a smaller group of younger kids huddled near the side tables, beginners too nervous to ask questions. Claire bent down, showed them the board, pointed out a few lines, and shared a smile. Vivian turned to Noah, her voice quiet. "She's not just playing. She's leading." Noah nodded. Like her father, like herself, Vivian said. Outside, the sky had cleared. The city buzzed as usual, but for once everything felt in tune. As they stepped out into the sunlight, Claire glanced up at both of them. "Let's get lunch," she said. "My treat. You've both earned it." Vivian laughed. On a chess champion's budget, Claire shrugged. "I make good moves." And they walked off together, not perfect, but present. A family not defined by what was broken, but by what they chose to rebuild. Thank you truly for staying with us through this journey. If you've made it here, it means you felt something real, and for that, we're deeply grateful. Stories like this don't just live on the screen. They live in the hearts of those who listen, who see themselves in the quiet moments, in the brave choices, in the second chances that don't always come easy. Whether you were moved by a struggling dad doing his best, a little girl who never stopped believing, or a mother who dared to come back and say the words that matter most, thank you for letting this story reach you. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment and share your thoughts. What moment touched you the most? What would you say to Claire, to Noah, to Vivian? Your support helps stories like these find their way into more hearts. If this one meant something to you, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and sharing it forward. It might seem small, but it keeps these heartwarming stories, these reminders of kindness and courage alive for others to discover. This was a story about loss, about healing, and most of all, about the quiet love that waits for years, if it has to, until the moment it's finally seen. Thank you for being part of it. Until the next chapter, stay kind, stay curious, and never stop believing in second chances. We'll see you again soon.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.